Let's listen to another clip here. Again, underourskin.com is where you can find more information about this powerful documentary about Lyme disease.
I have seen probably 30, maybe more doctors.
35 doctors.
About 15 doctors.
I've spent over $100,000 out of pocket.
$150,000.
$75,000 to $100,000.
I was misdiagnosed for 3 years.
5 years. 14 years.
15 years.
It's hundreds of thousands of dollars.
This is a scene where one of the patients empties a huge file box of medications onto the floor. That's Jordan, the park ranger.
I'm guessing that my case, which could have been controlled with probably a single bottle of doxycycline, at the time I was bitten, probably would have cost something like $25 or $50 total, plus the doctor visit. As it is, I'm guessing that my case is now amounted to $75,000 to $100,000.
And that's quite a powerful image. And you know, this gets into a whole range of issues of the uninsured cost that these people endure. And, of course, we're trying for some health care reform in Washington right now. I think whatever we get will be better than what we have, but it doesn't, you know, even remotely approach what we need. And these people still will have to fumble through the system. And that big box of drugs that Jordan dumped on the floor there represent potential side effects and unintended consequences from misprescribing of those drugs. So there's great risk to him in trying to treat this illness that he could compound that. And again, the medical establishment doesn't even respond to that on a cost basis.
Yeah. Well, let me first try to sift through this and explain a little bit here. Lyme disease does not need to become a chronic infection. And I think that's the point that Jordan is trying to make here. Had he been properly diagnosed early on, it could have been treated with a simple dose of antibiotics. But it wasn't. It wasn't identified, and it wasn't identified because of going back to the assumptions that we have about Lyme disease. It doesn't exist in California. His doctor said so. Why would anybody not believe their family physician? So again, it's what's being taught. It's not Lyme disease is not a problem, which is the big assumption. Now, what he dumped on the floor, it wasn't just because he was misdiagnosed. These were not necessarily medications that were prescribed for illnesses that physicians thought he had. But once Lyme disease becomes chronic, it's not so simple as taking a few antibiotics. It's a long process. And it's not just Lyme disease. That's why this issue is so complicated and people's heads start to spin, because Lyme disease, as we know it, chronic Lyme disease, is really not just Lyme disease, that little microorganism that I was talking about before. It's also co-infections of other things that exist inside the gut of an infected tick that are transmitted to humans, which make it much more difficult to treat. Mm-hmm. And also there are most likely other variables, genetic variables, hormonal variables, and as well as trauma. Physical and psychological trauma also seem to play a part in the disease progression. So, once Lyme disease does become chronic, very often it's sort of out of control. And the costs, you mentioned the question of costs, really are astronomical. I mean, you compare what Jordan's cost for a $50 bottle of doxycycline against, I think he said, $75,000 of medication. And who's going to pay for that? Insurance companies don't want to pay for that. Mm-hmm. And they're going to do, because it's their business, they're going to do everything they can not to pay for it. And so there's a very convenient excuse written by the Infectious Disease Society of America, which says chronic Lyme disease doesn't exist.
Yeah. So, Andy, you also bring to the screen many of the people who turn out to be quite brave, doctors, medical professionals, who are willing to buck the establishment and in the interest of compassion and in following their own sense of biology and medical science, they pursue various efforts to address the underlying illness that they see presenting in various kinds of symptoms.
Right.
And you profile a doctor in Connecticut, one in New York, one in Seattle, and another in North Carolina. And the common thread is that they're responding to their patients and their patients' needs. And yet, and I don't want to give away everything in the film, but you describe how many of them end up subjected to a discipline before state medical boards, and you profile some who actually lose their license to practice medicine. And this seems even more insidious, that those who are trying to help people and who are supplying them with prescriptions for this long-term treatment of antibiotics are being disciplined, even though what they're doing is not causing any visible harm to these patients, and even in face of overwhelming evidence, that anecdotal as it is, that the people who are treated in this manner mostly get better.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's not just anecdotal that they get better. They do get better, many of them.
Well, but I'm trying to be fair to pure science and academics who would say, well, we need a blind study and we need to watch some people die so that we know that the ones that lived actually, responded to the treatment.
What's anecdotal is for them is that they got better because of the long-term regimen of antibiotics.
Mm-hmm.
And you said that these so they're actually called Lyme literate physicians, that these so-called Lyme literate physicians are responding to their medical intuitions, and it's more than that. I mean, they're responding to science, and so they are taking back the helm and saying you can't tell us that there's no science that supports the idea of chronic Lyme infection, because it's out there, and it is. And I've seen it. So when I hear this sort of mantra, there's no scientific evidence. There's no scientific evidence. I say that's baloney. There is scientific evidence. There's peer-reviewed studies showing the persistence of the microorganism that causes Lyme disease in the human body past the recommended 2 to 4 weeks of antibiotic therapy. So that's just not true. And what these physicians are doing is based on science and based on laboratory results as well, tests that show infection. They're doing their work and trying to make patients better. And sometimes that requires long-term antibiotic therapy. Sometimes it requires intravenous antibiotic therapy that go on for months. And in some cases, the treatment goes on for years. Now, we treat acne with antibiotics for years, and other medical problems as well. But for some reason, people who have disabling and potentially life-threatening disease, they're not allowed to be on long-term antibiotics, especially when the evidence shows that it seems to make a difference, even if you call it anecdotal. Mm-hmm. So it's really criminal, and ironically, what's happening is these physicians, many of whom these physicians who are treating Lyme patients, chronic Lyme patients, they're the ones who are being called criminal, and in some cases are losing their licenses.
And here's a clip about an individual doctor, North Carolina, is that right?
Yes.
Jemsick, and this is a scene at the medical licensing board.
It is difficult for doctors who want to stand up and help these patients because it is a political disease and an economic disease as much as it is a bacterial-borne infection.
My office was stormed by the Board of Nurse Examiners.
I got a letter around 2000 saying that I was a subject of
an investigation.
A complaint went in from a physician to the Virginia Board of Medicine stating that I was following unusual practices in treating Lyme disease patients.
Here we are in Raleigh, North Carolina, and we're on day 2 of the GEMSEC trial.
Oh, we're going.
Dr. GEMSEC's license is suspended for 1 year, stayed, and the conditions to be determined. That concludes the hearing in this matter.